Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there's the whole interesting thing with Cheryl. I thought it was kind of interesting because obviously it's like, okay, like the Bulldogs are on their way to the championship. This is the championship game. They could go... was it like regionals and stuff like that, but regardless, it's like this is a big monumentous occasion. It's Spirit Week, and obviously the Vixens are in a complicated situation because lo and behold, Apple, what's her name? Was it Applebert? I'm blanking on her name now. The new coach for the Vixens, which have they ever, I guess they've never had a coach. I've never noticed that the entire series. I've never noticed that until now. It's like, right, because it's always been Cheryl's show to kind of run. And it's like, oh, Honey's bringing in someone else. I mean, that's the weird, like, there's always this back and forth between Honey and Cheryl. Because for him, I think he likes being able to control things. I mean, to be fair, like, everything in Riverdale has been wild under Weatherby's reign. So it's like, I came here to rein things in. And that includes Cheryl Blossom, because Cheryl is, you know, the wildfire that she is. So, but it's just like, you kind of, like, this is how things have kind of run so far. But for him, it's like, oh, because, like, she has taken teams to the regionals before, like 3 times in a row. So, but for Cheryl, she doesn't. She's like, oh, this is fine. But it's like the fact is, the Vixens are mine, and it turns into a little back and forth between them. Obviously, Cheryl threatens that her and the rest of the Vixens will go on strike if Honey doesn't handle this situation. And he's like, normally I don't do well with threats, but he's like, all right, I'll put it in consideration. But it turns out that was just, he ended up threatening the rest of the Vixens by being like, if you don't go in line, fall in line, none of you are going to be able to go to prom or whatever. So that was kind of sucky. But the fact of the matter is, and lo and behold, who's by your side? Tony. It's like, dude, every time it comes to Cheryl and Tony, man, you go, damn, Tony's super ride or die, dude. That's nuts. I mean, grand scheme of things, when you think about everything they've been through, hell, even just earlier stuff this season, I just pointed out even more of just like the whole, like, was it Julian situation? I'm like, that's super ride or die. The whole, like, her and, the whole, you know, Cheryl and Jason situation. Tony took that with stride. It's like, man, she's super ride or die. Because even she's like, look at all these traitors. Let's go, babe. And it's like, yo, that's great. I didn't even think about it at the time until like Veronica pops up. It's like, oh yeah, Veronica wasn't there. I mean, to be fair, like Veronica's not, she's kind of like, she's a wildfire like Cheryl. She's not going to fall in line. But obviously it's like all the Vixens betrayed her and everything. It's like you have a chance to redeem yourself. So it's like all of you caved in. We were supposed to kind of stand united, but we didn't. But Cheryl's like, it's not over. And so she locks the coach inside the locker room. It's like, well, the fact of the matter is, Honey doesn't do well with threats. Neither does Cheryl. It's like, I think he kind of keeps underestimating Cheryl. But like I said, they've had their back and forth this season. I'm like, where is that going to go? I don't see those lines kind of getting drawn evenly. Like, you know, Cheryl's not the type to back down. So she goes out there and she's like, the fact of the matter is, I've kind of led you guys for like 4 years and I've never turned my back on you guys like you turned on me. So, hey, let's do this. It is kind of messed up in the grand scheme of things. It's like, Cheryl might be kind of the way she is, but the fact of the matter is she's always looked after her Vixens and everything. So I just thought it was kind of a neat situation, but it's like, yeah, I mean, because for, you know, obviously they're seniors now. This is going to be the last hurrah. Same thing for like Archie when it comes to this football game. This is like his last chance, which, you know, kind of diving into all that, there's everything with Archie's story where it's the whole situation of obviously like this championship game means a lot. Because obviously it's Archie's last game, you know, as a senior and everything. But then, like, it's a big chance for everyone else. Because obviously, you know, Mad Dog, you know, Monroe, he's like the star of the football team. But they're going up against Stonewall, which Stonewall has a reputation for playing dirty. Not even just playing dirty, playing to hurt. And so we see Monroe gets attacked by people in bunny masks. It didn't click in my head. I was like, the bunny mask. I was like, is that supposed to recognize something? And I was like, right. We know that because, like, what was it? Donna and Brett attacked Betty and Jughead wearing that. I was like, right, because I legitimately had forgotten that first. Like, I was like, okay, so that's the correlation there. So, But despite everything, it's not like they could do anything. But Archie and the Bulldogs show up. And I love that it makes sense that Archie would be the first one who deals the punching blow to Brett, mouthful of blood and everything. It's like, yeah, because it's the problem. It's like, all right, it's like, not only has Archie been through a couple fights in general, just been through a lot over the course of the series, like, he also did box. So that's going to be one hell of a punch. But regardless of all of that, he ends up kind of getting thrown in jail. Frank kind of bails him out. He tries not to let his mom know, because mom's got too much on her mind. Mom finds out. Because it's interesting with this whole Frank situation, because Frank was originally going to leave, but just the way Frank was talking earlier, I was like, Frank is like, nah, it's like, yeah, it's working at your dad's business. I was thinking about that. I'm like, I don't know, that just seems a little shady. Because it is interesting, like, you pick now out of any time to come back. I mean, maybe there's more to that, but at the same time, like, you kind of can't help but think, like, you probably had ulterior motives. Just like Jughead's mom popping up last season when she popped up in Riverdale. It's like she didn't have the best of intentions, so I'm thinking it's kind of a similar thing in that regard, but we'll see. Because obviously Archie's mom is not a fan of Frank at all. So that was kind of interesting, but we actually kind of find out why later on, because it's like, for her, she's a little hurt too, because it's like, you went to Frank, you should come, like, when you need something. It's me, I'm your mom, like, I'm here. Don't trust Frank, because Fred got a DUI because he was covering for Frank, because it would have been Frank's third strike. So it's like, that's the type of person your uncle is. The fact is, your dad did that for him. The next morning he bounced. And so Archie brings it up to his uncle, but, Frank talks about, like, he wasn't in the right place in his, because like everything he had been through, he hadn't really processed, like what he went through, Desert Storm, with the military and everything. So it's actually kind of interesting, because in the grand scheme of things, like I skipped over it, but him and Archie had this interesting conversation about Fred, because it seems like a lot of that Archie is the way he's a kind of bit of a fighter, like that fire and Archie, very much like his dad. It's like Frank is like, yeah, your old man was kind of like that. He could get into bar fights and stuff, and Archie's like, I can't even imagine my dad throwing a punch. I mean, Fred's thrown some, but he was always, that's wisdom for you, growing older, where you kind of like temper out. You try to be like, yeah, I can't be that wildfire anymore. I got to kind of balance out. So it kind of shows you, like, I think when it's all said and done, Archie is definitely going to end up being, like Fred when he gets older. That's what I kind of think in the grand scheme of things. But like I said, regardless, the fact of the matter is, it's, it is interesting to hear, like, because you wouldn't think, like, Fred has shown that, he could get heated, but, like, you still could never imagine him, like, Archie. But to be fair, Archie had to come from somewhere. I think it's probably a combination of, like, he gets his fiery spirit from both of his parents. But regardless, I thought that was just kind of a neat little element. I think for Archie, it was kind of probably neat to kind of think, like, me and my dad have even more in common than I even realized. I thought that was kind of like a sweet thing to kind of think about. But for Archie, it's like kind of, but hearing this about his uncle, it kind of changed things. But his uncle's like, the fact of the matter is, like, that's the type of person your dad was. And even Archie reckoned, like, helping someone despite, putting himself in that situation. Because Frank is like, I never would ask him to do it, which begs the question, did he actually ask Fred to do it? You never know. But the fact of the matter is, he asked Fred, like, he didn't ask Fred to do it, but it's just, that's the type of person Fred would when it comes to because going back to it, when it comes to people, he cares about his friends and his family, much like Archie. He'll go above and beyond for them, So, but for him, Frank kind of wants to make up for that. He was so filled with shame about it, and he never got a chance to really make up for it. And especially now that Fred's gone. So, but that's, like I said, it's just the timing's interesting. You're back in town at that time, and also later on, it's because of the whole Mad Dog Monroe situation. He's offering Monroe pills, which is like, yo, like, I guess it's like it's not a steroid, but it's enough to kind of numb the pain and stuff like that. But still, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like they probably get on you because they probably don't. I mean, I think depending on what kind of medication it is, like pain pills or something would probably be fine as long as there's no sports enhancement drug. But that's the thing I was kind of worried about. I was like, oh, if it's a pain reliever, or he didn't say pain reliever, it would just numb him, which isn't a good thing, because if you're numb from the pain, that means when stuff goes sideways, you really won't feel it. That, like, obviously, like, not being able to feel pain is an issue, because you won't be able to tell, like, when to stop pushing your body too hard. Obviously, Archie was against it, but Monroe kind of goes along with it anyway. And so obviously during a football game, they kind of give it their all, but obviously Stonewall wins anyway, because obviously they had an advantage because Monroe wasn't at 100%. But regardless, they still kind of gave it their all. And luckily, because Monroe did play the game, a scout from Notre Dame saw him and is like offering him to, because obviously Archie was like, you can't do this because if you do this, there's a good chance you might do more damage that you might not be able to ever play again. So you're compromising a potential future you might have if you do this. But for Monroe, he has too much on the line. He's got to look after his little brother, his grandma. So like for him, it's like, I need this opportunity, you know? So how much this means to him. Obviously, Archie was pissed at his uncle, but in the grand scheme of things, it worked out. It's like, you know, and it was interesting because Frank tries to justify it by being like, me, you, and Monroe, you know, much like your dad, like the fact of the matter is we're the type of people that we have to take risks, because if we don't take risks with what the world kind of gives us, we kind of won't, we won't get what we want. Like, we kind of deserve things, so we have to take those risks. And it's like, in this particular case, the risk worked out, you know. And Archie's kind of got that mentality of like, you know, sometimes you need to take a risk. But I'm like, yeah, but that might be your uncle is probably going to be a bad influence on you. And obviously that's what, you know, his mom's worried about. So it's going to be interesting to see where things kind of go. Him, if he does potentially take over the business, because obviously Archie is running the center and everything. And obviously, you know, that's, you know, probably Archie feels like it's probably better in his uncle's hands than it is his hands, which is interesting because obviously, like, you know, Fred ended up inheriting a lot of stuff when his dad died, when he was basically the same age that Archie was, you know, so that's a whole thing to kind of think about in the grand scheme of things. So I'm curious to see where things kind of go on that front. Another side of this is obviously Betty's side of the story, which coincides with Jughead's side of the story, because there's the whole Quill and Skull situation. It was actually interesting, like, when they each told their own dark story, like, because basically it's like, oh, part of your induction, the final stage is tell a secret that's being recorded, which is like, that's very much like The Farm, interestingly enough. I'm surprised, but I guess I guess we're just kind of flowing with the punches, going with the punches in that regard. But Jughead is like, okay, so you know, everyone ends up telling their secrets. We hear Donna's secret, which is like, that's fucked up. You hear Brett's secret, that's messed up. And so that was interesting, and it's just like Jughead ended up telling his, which was actually kind of sad. And it's interesting, like, basically it was like, oh, here's this dude, I saw him kind of get beat to death, and I just stood there, I didn't do anything. And for him, it's like, that's something he hasn't told anyone, even Betty. Like, obviously he knows a lot of Betty's dark secrets, and he's never told her kind of one of his. Like, for him, it's like, that's his biggest shame, because it's like, you know, it was back when he was homeless, and the fact of the matter is he probably feels like, I could have done something, I should have done something, but I didn't. And, you know, so that was interesting. But I'm curious, like, obviously that's going to be used to probably blackmail Jughead later on. We'll see what ends up happening in that regard. But all the while, like, Betty is obviously trying to build a case against Stonewall about their cheating and stuff like that. The fact is that they hurt people. They don't just play to win, they hurt. Especially when she interviews Brett, and Brett's kind of treating it kind of like a gladiator thing of just kind of like, basically like, you go after your enemy hard, and it's just like, this ain't some knitting thing. This is football. Like, things get rough, and that's just like, you're supposed to decimate your enemy type of situation. And it's like, yep. And the way he smiles and just the cadence in which he speaks is like, man, you are a psychopath. Which is, like I said, you know, because I knew him first as, what's his character's name, Victor, in Deadly Class. Very similar yet different characters. I feel like, which is crazy to say, Victor being a assassin and everything, being a trained assassin, that Brett is more of a psychopath. I think that speaks volumes. Just my personal opinion. I think that's interesting, but in the grand scheme of things, like, she has Veronica going undercover and stuff like that, and sadly, I was like, all right. It's like, I had a feeling, I was like, you're going to run into Jughead at this party, aren't you? And it's like, oh, she totally does. And he blows her cover, and it's like, oh, you're part of a secret society? Yeah, did you let Betty know? Because if you didn't, she does know now, because I'm wearing a wire. So it's like, okay, so that turns into a thing, and Jughead's like, all right. She's like, why didn't you tell me? Obviously, you wanted to have nothing to do with that school, but now you're actually part of a secret society. And she's like, what about your chances of getting into, you know, yell and everything, which I thought that was kind of an interesting element, because obviously it's like, oh, obviously that was a school that Betty wanted to get into but couldn't, but now Jughead felt bad about, because it's like, what if I get in the school that you wanted to get into? So, but for her, it's like, I'd never take that opportunity away from you. It's a great opportunity, and like, I wouldn't let my situation change that for you, you know? But obviously it's like, the perks of being a part of a secret society is like, hey, you get perks from it, you know, like such as this. So it was interesting, but obviously it does be part of a secret society as well as going to the school. I'm surprised DuPont kind of let a lot of that stuff go. The whole situation with Jughead and his grandfather, I guess because he let it go. I guess because he let it go, like the conspiracies and stuff like that, that whole angle of things, because he let it go, I guess DuPont's kind of letting it go, because DuPont is kind of treating Jughead nicely, which is interesting in the grand scheme of things, but nevertheless. But at first, because it's like, oh, like, your girlfriend's running this certain story, do you think you can kind of convince her not to? And it's like, Jug's like, if it means compromising my whole thing with Yale, then it's fine, but like, I can't tell Betty like what she should and shouldn't write. The fact of the matter is, that's just not our relationship. He's like, nope, I completely understand. I'm like, are you really going to let that go? I was like, but Jughead kind of accepted, it means I'm not getting into Yale, but turns out, hey, at the end of the day, I'm super getting into Yale. Yay, celebrate. Oh, Brett's getting into it too. Yay. I was kind of hoping, I was like, yeah, I'd kind of accept everything, but it's like, I'm fine being part of this secret society and everything, but I kind of want to get the hell away from you, especially because you're bragging and when you won the game, it's like, oh, looks like that story of yours, Betty, didn't go through because Honey turned that down. I'm wondering why. I mean, I'm assuming because Honey, well, for one, it's like, well, all of it's hearsay, there's no substantiated evidence against it, but also, like, he's not trying to stir up any trouble. It's like he's trying to keep everything super positive, as Josie says in the Katie Keene trailer or commercial I saw of like Riverdale being murder capital. It's like, oh, the bad stuff that's going down in Riverdale, a little more positively spread around, especially in this school, considering all the dark stuff that's going down in the school. So it's probably that situation too. So I think it's definitely going to be interesting. Like, it's interesting how, like, Honey's whole situation. I'm interested to dive into that and see like what big parts he plays in anything, if any big parts. But it seems like he plays a key role in a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and I'm kind of curious to see where it kind of all ends up being at the end of all of it. But regardless, nevertheless, but like obviously Brett was like, oh yeah, that story of yours got shut down, and he's like, oh, I can't wait till us go head to head again, Betty, because I love winning against you. And it's just like, oh, you're such a dick. But Betty takes this as an opportunity, like, hey, there's like this quiz thing that, competition. And obviously Stonewall's coming up for it, and obviously Brett's the captain of it. So she wants to use this as an opportunity to take him down. It's like, I might not be able to kind of get you in this regard, but it's personal. She just wants to put Brett in his place. It's like, and even Honey's like, hey, I'd love to get us one trophy at the end of this year. So if you want to do this kind of like quiz debate thing, it's like, sure, I'm giving you full access to kind of go wild. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that ends up playing out. Obviously, I know the angle to this I forgot to talk about was the whole Veronica situation, which I know, kind of circling back to the whole cheerleading thing. I meant to bring this up because I took notice of it. I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, obviously, obviously, cheerleading, Cheer Squad has been a part of this series for a while. I mean, obviously, it's been, it's, Cheryl's baby. It's her thing. But I just think it's interesting because it's like, right, literally this Friday, season 3 of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina comes out. And from the trailer, it shows at least Sabrina and Roz are a part of the cheerleading squad. So I just think the timing's interesting because that's never really come up in part 1 or part 2. So for part 3, and I just think, like I said, that just week wise, I just thought that was kind of interesting. It just immediately made me think of that. I was like, right, that popped up in I mean, obviously, once again, it's not too much of a surprise. Like, obviously, comic book wise, they take place in the same universe. Continuity of the respective shows, Riverdale and Sabrina, they don't. Even though there is a Riverdale in that, but they're different Riverdales and different Greendales. They make sure not to connect those continuities because that also would be admitting like, all right, all the strange stuff that goes down, the supernatural stuff that goes down in Sabrina would exist in its continuity too, and I don't think they're trying to keep it not supernatural. So that's my thought process behind that. But regardless, like I said, I'm going on a tangent and whatnot. It just came into my mind. But obviously, like, Veronica's still trying to sell the liquor and everything. Well, the rum. Obviously, she took her grandmother's recipe and modified it to try and sell it, but obviously it wasn't enough because one of the said people there, the one who probably bought the case, it seems like that woman in particular who bought the case, it's at least one of them. Maybe others did, but it seems like one person in particular that we noticed bought it was the lady that works for Hiram, and it's like, oh. Because now it's like, oh, I'm basically going to give you a cease and desist because going forward, if you keep selling this rum, I will sue you. Because yes, it's a modified version, but it's not modified enough because at its core, it's still the original recipe. So trademarks and patents and stuff like that. Copyright stuff is weird with that. Like, something has to be different. Like, that's always, to me, that seems so subjective to a certain extent, but like, I am curious, like, what the percentage of different has to be for it to be considered a fully modified product to not be the same thing on a legal standpoint, you know? So, and it turns into an interesting conversation because Hiram's like, well, why don't you work with me? And she's like, oh, that's a hell no. He's like, I've literally turned things around. You wanted me not to be criminal and stuff like that. I gave up that criminal stuff. It's like, I don't know. Personally, I don't know, and I don't believe you, Hiram. I don't see you just walking away from everything. But it's like, well, maybe that would explain why Hermione was willing to give him another chance. But it's also just like, he's a smooth talker. Plus, they have a lot of history, and I think that accounts for a lot of stuff, despite, like, it's kind of like, oh, us trying to kill each other. Oh, you know, us having this complicated thing. It's like, you know, that's flirtation. That's our way of flirting, you know. So it's that whole situation. So I'm curious in the grand scheme, like, we haven't necessarily seen him do anything shady. I mean, he did help out with the whole Fred situation, showing that, like, hey, even he can be a decent human from time to time. He has the potential. It just seems like he lets his mafioso scumbag side just kind of take over more. But I'm like, oh, we'll see. But obviously, I think it's also, remember that counselor played by Gina Torres? Like, she kind of made a point of, like, Veronica and her dad was kind of caught in this complicated, twisted cycle that he looks at her being kind of a reflection of himself, and so it's like she has to make a clean break, because much like Hermione, like, every time something happens, like, you kind of circle back and are you willing to kind of forgive him? And I don't know, because Veronica, he's like, why won't you let me help? And she's like, I don't know, like. She's like, maybe it's because there's so much damage that it feels like it can't be repaired, because it just, every time she turns around, it's just more and more. When she forgives him, it just more stuff comes up, and it's just kind of like, maybe you've just caused so much damage that maybe I just can't look at you the same way anymore. I don't know. It's a very complicated thing. I think she's taking that stuff from that therapy episode to heart, but I'm also curious, like, what that means. I don't know. Is it kind of implying that there are other reasons? Because it did seem like when he was walking away, she almost had this sad look on her face, like, I want to, but it's interesting. It's like she wants to still, I think there's a part of her trying to fight that thing of, like, going back to her dad. Is like, no, I can do this on my own. But then, like, she tastes like a snow cone by Cheryl that has syrup in it. But also, I also love that Reggie, obviously having Veronica's back keys, his car. Well, I'm assuming because he was like, oh, if you want to kind of get back at your dad. I guess it was more so a combination of the two of them working together with that. But regardless, so there's that whole situation. But now Veronica's taking this opportunity to kind of mix her grandmother's, her abuelita, her rum with Cheryl's syrup to kind of make a new concoction, making it probably percentage-wise, if she changes it enough, it becomes a new product that's no longer the same. So these two going into business together, which is pretty interesting. The Blossoms, and, well, she's not currently she's a Luna now and not currently a Lodge. So Luna and Blossoms, which is interesting. Just kind of makes me think of, just because obviously, like, makes me think of, you know, Blossoms and just obviously like the lunar stuff. And maybe there's even something even deeper there that I'm not really piecing together. Regardless, I'm going on a tangent. So there's that. So that's an interesting business opportunity. But obviously the tail end of the episode, a little stinger we get at the end, is obviously like a month later, we see Betty packing up Jughead's stuff, and she's got tears in her eyes, and he's like, Brett shows up and is like, well, you got what you want. I'm not going to Yale with Jughead. The fact of the matter is, because I don't remember all the timeline wise stuff, but this is after he was dead, but before, like, Cheryl, Archie, and Veronica got arrested for his murder. I'm assuming this is well before that, but the fact of the matter is, Brett and her are apparently going to end up going to the same school. So I think it's implying that basically she did something, like either she cheated or whatever it is. She screwed Brett over so much that he can no longer go to Yale. So he kind of ends up getting shipped to a different school. And maybe this, I would assume anything related to Jughead, like even though it's all pointing to Veronica, Archie, and Betty, the fact is this Quill and Skull business is kind of what got Jughead. Like I said, they're keeping this like very like, oh, how is this all going to play out? It's probably not going to be till much later in the season that we really kind of piece it all together. But ultimately, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, maybe it might end up coming up a lot sooner than I give it credit for. So it's going to be interesting to see what that all entails, how we got there, and what that means going forward. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, light to the force, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.